And so it's a pretty interesting quote here that he gives us by.
Yeah, it was really good.
Right, because Monton, I think is his name. He's trying to make the case.
Bradley Monton.
Yeah, he's trying to make the case here that science will probably never be able to answer our most important philosophical questions. So what's he?
Yeah. Monton's quote here says, "The history of science is full of seemingly insoluble gaps in the understanding that has never been filled in naturalistically. For example, we don't know the nature of consciousnesses or how conscious mental activity arises out of physical brain activity. So I want to move my arm. There, I've moved my arm. How did I do that? Is it just chemicals, or is there something else that's controlling it? We don't know why the universe exists. Again, why being a philosophical question. We don't know why there is something rather than nothing. We don't know why the universe has 3 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension. We don't know what the nature of mass is. We don't know what the universe is made of. Most of it seems to be dark matter, but we don't even know what dark matter is or if it exists. That's just a placeholder for,
something we don't know.
There seems to be a lot more gravitational activity and mass in the universe, but it's just dark. We can't see it. There we go. He goes on to say, we don't have a single fundamental theory of physics, which we talked a little bit about last time. The 2 theories we do have, general relativity and quantum theory, are incompatible. The list could go on. Thus, it's reasonable, here's the point, thus it is reasonable to be cautious in assuming that any new gap we discover will naturalistically be filled in as well.
Yeah, so if the naturalistic explanations can't fill in these various issues, even, why would we think whatever else comes up, right, would fill these issues? And these are questions, metaphysical questions, that the study of the physical universe seems doesn't allow us, or it's difficult to think that will allow us to answer these types of questions.
Yeah, and we go back earlier in the book. We talked about the billiard balls hitting each other. The question isn't here. What did they do? We know once one strikes the one, it moves away. The question is why. You see it happening, and you can say, the force of one pushed the other force away, but there's no explanation for the metaphysical why of why it happens.
And so he says, even if it's not impossible to infer metaphysical conclusions from scientific premises, it's a risky business, right? Right? Especially at our level of scientific knowledge. Right?
Yeah, it seems like we are starting over again. It's what we talked about last time is scientists didn't sit around before Newton and say, well, I know we got it wrong, but we're almost there. It's like, no, here's the paradigm. We're existing in it. It seems to work, and we do the bloodletting and all the other phrenology and the things that phrenology came later, of course, but the attempt to do science within that framework, and then holes start appearing, planets start appearing, movement of planets start to be discombobulated, technology is formed.
Or Mercury, rather.
Yeah. And then you have this revolution, and that's kind of how science has always been. And so we exist now in the state of quantum mechanics is the answer. Look at all the TV shows. Everything is quantum tachyon. Right. You watch Star Trek, and you can see where science pretends to be at in the future. You see the sci-fi shows where it talks about quantum mechanics, and as Mitch Stokes would say, that there's probably some truth within quantum mechanics, but whether or not the entire branch is going to find you the truth, especially when it's in conflict with what we see in relativity, it doesn't seem like we're going to come up with something within that field. It seems like we have to go through another round of revolution. But it seems like we're just in that early stage of even figuring out, we're the monkeys hitting the bones right outside the 2001 Space Odyssey obelisk.
Yeah. So then he says, so when is it proper to use science to help us answer philosophical questions? He says, I wish there were an easy answer. Perhaps the best we can do is to take it case by case, but perhaps there's something we can say here. He says that we might be able to identify the general whereabouts of the cliff's edge. When it comes to the laws of the universe, it simply isn't within the purview of science, not even cosmology and particle physics, to explain the origin of these laws, right? So now we can at least get some take on where one discipline ends, the other starts, or vice versa, and that sort of thing. He says we can say that the universe behaves this way or that way, but just why it behaves this way is something that science isn't equipped to handle. Of course, science can give us approximate explanations and causes, but never ultimate ones, or so it seems to him anyway, right?
Right. And we do see in the second part of this book the attempt by scientists, physicists, and naturalists to try and scientifically explain why you shouldn't do things, or why you ought or should or can't. And here it's saying, well, who really believes the fact that you can put up equation on the board, and by the time you get done with it, you can say, don't kill neighbor equals don't kill neighbor. Like, okay.
Or give it, right.
So if no one really understands that, here...
A physical explanation about why it's immoral to kill the neighbor, right? Yeah.
And yes, there are good things that you can come up with for excuses, utilitarianism or survival of the fittest, depending on which way you want to go with that. But if it's a struggle for us to kind of have that understanding there, we should understand that there are limitations of science. There are hundreds of discussions we have even today, things that have been going on for millennia, on exactly what where that divide is, and the social ilks of society and problems and understanding. Even economic issues fall into that. Like if you have communism, there's the understanding that humanity is basically good, and sharing ends up becoming the ultimate good on top of that. But then you have things like those darn Christians that believe in original sin and people are born evil, and so then you have the system of like capitalism that works within that framework, and subjective value rather than intrinsic value within just doing work. So all those things inform things, and we wouldn't say here's where science can come in and save the day and swoop in and give us an equation, or titrate a tube that it turns green when you're right and red when you're wrong, or something along those lines. So having this attempt to come up with answers that are outside of a purview of science, again, as Mitch Stokes would say, does a disservice to what our understanding of science is. We need to understand there are limits, and those limits are fine. There's no reason for it, unless if you have preconceived ideas like naturalism is all there is, because then how do you define things like numbers, laws of logic, morality, any of those type of things? So that's what I think he's building the case here.
Yeah, right.